This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and quickly. And while I'm doing that, I will just mention that I sent out an email this morning, or I think it was this morning or last night, about what we're going to be doing on Wednesday night going forward. And so what I'm going to do is sort of bring this series to a sort of a temporary closure right now. And we'll pick it up like we have the Tough Topic series as something emerges. Like if I run across something that fits into this particular topic and series, then I will, do a session that will be included in this particular series, similar to the way we're doing the Tough Topic series, going forward. But next Wednesday, I'll figure out something that we're going to start in the way of a new series next Wednesday, and we'll kind of move on from there. Here's what I'd like for you to do, though. If you do run across questions that you have, and really this applies to anything, it doesn't have to be, biblical prophecy, but let's just take biblical prophecy. If you run across an issue of, pretty great significance in today's world and culture and the news that you're watching and observing, if you run across something that you would like to bounce around with me, and then I might consider to include in this series, as a one session address on a Wednesday night, let me know. Shoot me an email, ask me the question, or give me the topic that you ran into and the Bible passage that you think may be relevant, and I'll take a look at it and see if it's something worthy of potentially addressing in this particular series as a ad hoc sort of session going forward. So there's a lot more that we could talk about in biblical prophecy, obviously, than we've covered in this series today. I don't know how many sessions that we've met in this series and doing it like this, but I don't know, maybe up in the teens or maybe in the 20s. I'm not sure, but it's in that range. And but there, in terms of biblical prophecy as a topic, as a whole, there is so much more that we could cover. There's a lot. But what I was trying to do in this series is really focus on those aspects of biblical prophecy where we see some sort of setting the stage today relative to when those biblical prophecies will in fact be fulfilled. So the stage has to be set in advance of, or it may not have to be set, but we're seeing it, what we think is the setting of the stage for those biblical prophecy events to be fulfilled. So we took a look at some of those, and I tried to stay pretty close to that theme. Sometimes I maybe drifted off a little bit and got into just looking at a passage that is of a prophetic nature, but for the most part, I tried to stay with that theme pretty carefully. The truth is, there's really not anything that's going on in our world today that's irrelevant to the setting of the stage. You can say that the whole world, the stage is being set, but that's a pretty big scope. We're not going to address everything, in one session. So trying to pick the topics and be a little bit more, I guess, focused, like a rifle shot is a little bit tougher to do. So tonight, what I wanted to do is just share with you a few. This isn't the exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. I wanted to share with you a few of the books that I found or that are on the horizon. They're about to be published, or maybe they've just been published and I haven't read them yet, that I think might be helpful to you to know in the event that you're interested in looking into this more. There's a ton of good information out there. Biblical prophecy, I, I don't know. I think if you write anything on biblical prophecy, if you have credibility and if you have credentials, you're going to get it published, and it's going to sell something in the marketplace. But there are so many options out there that you can easily get confused and easily get overwhelmed, quite frankly, with all that's available in the way of biblical prophecy. But when you look at, more recent and more contemporary writers, there's a few that fall into kind of a bucket that I look at and would refer to, and I would take their writings pretty seriously. Now, it doesn't mean that I agree with 100% with everything that these guys are saying. I mean, that goes without saying, I would hope. And I would hope also that I've been able to cover enough biblical prophecy with you guys and anybody listening on, on the podcast, um, that you've got to filter, and you've got to filter to be able to identify, some things that may not be quite aligned with sort of the model that I've used in the past and shared with you. And if if you run across something in your reading where you have a question, where you're like, what this guy's writing seems to make sense, but I don't know that it aligns with what I heard Steve say, when we covered, Matthew 24, or when we looked at prophetic Babylon or whatever. There's something, that doesn't reconcile well, and I see a discrepancy. That's fine. Let me know. Let's have a conversation and talk about that discrepancy and see, and if I can't convince you, you know, or if my argument, I guess I should say, is not superior to that being advanced by the author that you're reading, well, then I need to look at maybe adjusting my view, or maybe I just haven't explained my view well enough. It could be one of the two, or perhaps something else, but it would help me too. So if you run across something after you've applied your filter and you say, I can't reconcile what I've heard Steve say with what I'm reading here, and what the argument I hear him making is either better or maybe it's not as good, but it's raising questions, then let me know. Let's have a conversation. Okay. Well, let me run into this. Let me get into this. So I've got about 2 slides here that have a bunch of different books. Now, some of these books I've mentioned in the past as we've been doing studies on prophecy. Some of them I haven't mentioned so much because some of them, quite frankly, have just come out. And in other cases, they're books that maybe I drew a little bit from, but I didn't go into great detail about the totality of the book. Um, but some of them you'll recognize, perhaps, the names of the writers, the authors, and the titles, because I've mentioned them quite extensively. So let's just run through this list here, and let me just share this with you. And again, this is not an all-comprehensive list. If you went and looked up some of these authors, you would find many other books that they've written, some that are not obviously pertinent to our topic tonight, and even additional ones that might be pertinent, but I just didn't select them because maybe they were older, maybe they were okay. It's just that I wasn't as familiar with them, and so I just left them out of the list. And then there's other authors, in addition to the ones and other books, in addition to the ones I'm going to share with you tonight, that may go back to the 1960s or 70s. Like you take Things to Come by J. Dwight Pentecost. There's a lot of great information in there, a lot of good biblical, and a lot of these writers, I mean, almost every one of these writers know about J. Dwight Pentecost, John Walvoord, and the books that they wrote, and they'll quote, and cite from those books. But what they've done is they brought a lot of that information more up to the current day, and taken into consideration some things that are happening on the world scene today that weren't included or weren't even considered in the writings of Walvoord and Pentecost and McLean and many others, okay, of that ilk and of that generation. But those guys laid a good foundation from which all of these people, or a lot of these people, have drawn as they've written their materials. So the third jihad, you've probably heard me mention this one. It's been a while since we've done our prophecy series, but the third jihad really deals with the goals of Islam regarding the West. And Michael Youssef is a wonderful writer and a wonderful Christian man. You've probably seen him if you watched, if you have watched Fox News and perhaps other channels. I think maybe even OAN. I've seen him there perhaps. He's actually out there, presenting the gospel in a way that, during an advertisement for maybe a book or his show or his podcast or whatever, and he's presenting the gospel to people as they watch his commercials. So he's a really, I really like the way he writes. He's really a good writer, and he knows the Middle East very well, coming from the Middle East himself. So the third jihad deals with the goals of Islam regarding the West, and I've quoted quite a bit from Michael Youssef's The Third Jihad. He also wrote a book called End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi. And this, you can see here the dates of publishing. That one goes back to about 2016. So whenever you see a date of publishing, back it up by about a year, and that's when they really concluded their writing. So he concluded the writing for the book probably in 2015. The book finally got published in 2016. So it's about the information that he's got in there. Some of it may be about 5 years old, but then other aspects of it, are just as relevant, then as they are now. So this end times and the secret of the Mahdi, that's where he shows the parallels and deals with the parallels between the Antichrist of Revelation and the Mahdi. And if you go back to some of the prophecy series that I've done several years ago, I was dealing with exactly the same thing, but I did not have his book at the time. I was pulling that information together largely based upon a couple of other books that I'll mention, and maybe some other materials that I've run across here and there, and then just my own, research. But I wish I'd had his book because that probably would have helped me and probably, made much more efficient my effort in that regard. Then you have The Hidden Enemy, that's also written by Michael Youssef. And that particular book deals with the war against aggressive secularism in our society. So it's a rather recent book. It's copyright's 2018, so he finished up his work, research work and everything, probably 2017. So about 3 years old, but it's still extremely, extremely relevant. So great book there. And then I move over to Erwin Lutzer. And Erwin Lutzer, if you go out and look at, Amazon.com or whatever, and you do a search on Erwin Lutzer, he's written tons of books. And one of his most popular selling books, and probably I think it's probably hitting the New York Times bestseller list, is 1 Minute After You Die. And I have bought I've bought several copies of that book, and I've given it to relatives and others when they were facing the loss of a loved one, or even after they lost a loved one. I've just I've just ordered it and sent it to them, and hopefully they benefited from it because it's just a really good book to help people preparing for death, the death of a loved one, the death of themselves, perhaps, I guess, or they've just gone through having experienced the death of a loved one. Really, really good book. But that's just one of his books. He's written tons of other books on a lot of different topics, but one of the topics that he's written on is the cross in the shadow of the crescent. And that's really a book that deals with the looming Islamic involvement in the end times. And so he's looking at Islam, he's comparing what's going on today with Islam and how that's setting the stage for how he presents Islam will likely be involved in the end times. And then you have Future Babylon by Charlie Dyer. I back several years ago, I had a number of interchanges with Charlie Dyer over the via email, due to having met Charlie briefly on a trip to Israel when he accompanied and was one of the guides on our first trip to Israel. And if you ever get a chance to go on a trip to Israel, a tour to Israel, if you can find a tour that Charlie Dyer leads, uh, grab it because it will be a great tour. And Charlie he's probably gone to Israel 100 times or more. He knows Israel like the back of his hand, and he has a podcast on Moody that comes through Moody called "The Land in the Book." And if you get a chance to listen to that podcast, he comes out once a week on Saturday. I think a new episode comes out every Saturday, I believe, and it's great podcast. He talks about what's going on over in Israel, and then he talks about what's something that's current in regard to Israel, like some technology that they're developing or something that they're doing in the way of, water. And he talks about kind of the geopolitical landscape. And then he'll address a passage and the biblical and the site and the topography and the archaeology surrounding that particular site that particular passage is set within. And then sometimes on the show they'll have a guest come that they interview. And so it's a really good show to listen to via podcast. But Charlie Dyer, Future Babylon, in that book, he deals with the biblical arguments for the rebuilding of Babylon. So some of you have had questions about, well, can Babylon really be rebuilt? How's that going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. I totally get it. That may be a book you want to take a look at, 2017. Clash of Kingdoms by Charlie Dyer. This book deals with kind of what the Bible has to say about Russia, about ISIS, Iran, and the end times. So it's kind of looking at all the different powers that are going to be involved in the end times. Again, Charlie Dyer, great writer, great guy. The ISIS Crisis Who is ISIS is really what that book is all about. 2015, so a little bit dated, but not that bad. I mean, it's still very relevant and has a lot of good information. And what you'll begin to see is if you as you go through these books that have anything with regard to Islam, you'll begin to see some overlap in terms of some of the information you'll get exposed to. And then you'll also begin to see different viewpoints about different prophetic passages, slightly different viewpoints depending on the author. And then there's going to be certainly differences between the approach I take and where I land on some passages and where these guys land. But for the most part, there's a lot of other good information to glean from these books that I don't have access to, that I would not find apart from these books. Then there's Jesus in the End Times. This is where Ron Rhodes, 2019. This is where he looks at Jesus's statements, Jesus's prophecies, and examines them from the standpoint of those that have to do and have anything to do with the end times. So probably a helpful look. This would be analogous to my Prophecy in the Parables series. So Jesus in the End Times. And then another book by Ron Rhodes, New Babylon Rising. New Babylon Rising is a study of Babylon in Scripture with a focus upon the New Babylon. So this one would go hand in glove with Charlie Dyer's book, Future Babylon. Spiritual Warfare in the End Times. This is a really new one. I haven't read this book yet. Now, some of these I've only read pieces of them, and some of them I haven't read yet. This is one that I have not read because it's so new. It's 2020, so it just recently been published, or if I'm not mistaken, that one may be still pending actually publishing. So it's very new, but in that one, he's dealing with the involvement of Satan and and the tools that he's going to use, that we may be seeing today that are sort of, in their inception phase of being used to a much greater extent in the last days. So again, the involvement of Satan and the tools that he uses relative to the end times. Okay, let me move this forward one slide. Another book that's a little bit older, I mean, this one goes back 12, 13 years ago, is Northern Storm Rising, Russia, Iran, and the Emerging End Times Military Coalition Against Israel, Ron Rhodes. So another good book. Some of these that are dealing with like Northern Storm Rising here and a couple of the others that I've already mentioned, they'll take a look at Ezekiel 38 and 39 that we looked at a week or two ago, and they'll offer their view and interpretation of it. And you're going to get different interpretations, and some interpretations, and I don't know if it's Ron or not, but it may be him or it may be Mark Hitchcock who's coming up. I can't remember which, but they take an interpretation of Ezekiel 38 and 39 that they believe, one of them, I don't know which, but one of them believes that Ezekiel 38 and 39 could occur, well before the rapture, and then sort of set the stage for the rapture occurring, and then the last day scenario unfolding. Well, I don't agree with that particular interpretation for various reasons. You can probably guess based upon our studies together in the past, and what you understand from the way I interpret. But there's other things that the book has to offer that are helpful. Okay. So, and it's also helpful just to know what the other views are that are out there so that you can bolster your own view or adjust as necessary. Israel on High Alert. Great book. This one deals with the history of the Mideast conflict and the future of Islam and the Jewish temple and many other topics. The Corona Crisis. This is a really new one. I haven't read this one yet, Mark Hitchcock. But here he's dealing with plagues, pandemics, and the coming apocalypse. So he's relating to the plagues and pandemics that we're seeing now to how the stage is being set for, end times prophecy. So this would not be too unlike what we've seen in the past. I think one of the very first session that I did in this series dealt with plagues and pandemics. And so it would be very much in line with that first session, and he's probably given a lot more information in his book than I gave in the 1 or 2 night session that we dealt with that. Then another one called by March Hitchcock called Showdown with Iran, also 2020. That's a really new book. I haven't read that one, but you can obviously just determine by the title what that book happens to be about. Then you have in 2011, so basically 10 years ago, 2010 when he finished it up, who is the Antichrist? Answering the question everyone is asking. Well, gosh, if everyone was asking it back then, they're even asking it more now. So that's a interesting book and an interesting read. ISIS, Iran, and Israel. Oh, and by the way, when you read a book like Who is the Antichrist, expect some. I'm not sure if it's Mark here or not. I don't recall. I know I looked at his book, but it's been a while since I've looked at it, and I don't remember exactly. I've looked at so many different books. Sometimes I get the authors and what their various positions. I get them confused, or I forget exactly who held what position. But Mark Hitchcock is an example when he writes Who is the Antichrist. Others have written books like that where they've, tried to explain the Antichrist figure, um, where they arrive at the revived Roman Empire and the dictator of the revived Roman Empire type of approach. I have a little bit different view about that, but still, as they examine the scriptures, they look at them. It helps you think through and develop your own view as to how you might answer that question. ISIS, Iran, Israel, and the End of Days. Really good book where Mark Hitchcock deals with those topics, and I think it's probably has some overlapping information in it relative to some of these other books, but Mark's a good writer and a good read, and I think you'd enjoy that. One book by Amir Sarfati, who you often hear interviewed on or mentioned on Jan Markell's podcast, is The Day Approaching. And again, a book dealing with the approaching last days and how the stage could be being set. And Amir Sarfati is, if I recall, he's an Israeli, and he came to Christ, and now he's writing books and speaking and teaching others. Uh, Now, these two books, Joel Richardson, I'm sure you're familiar with these because I know when I've done the prophecy series in the past, and I've tied together things, the eschatology of Islam, specifically Shia Islam, with biblical prophecy. I drew heavily from these two books and some of the things that they said or some of the things that Joel Richardson wrote in these two books. I found them to be very helpful. Uh, Even though I think in some cases I may deviate a little bit from where they land, but it's not that's okay. There's still a lot of great information in these two books, and very, very helpful information. And you can see one's 2009, the other one's 2012. So these are getting a little bit more dated. And interestingly enough, I don't know. I haven't looked at the footnotes and the bibliography of some of these other books, but it wouldn't surprise me a bit if some of these other books didn't draw from what Joel had to say in these two books. So that's a that's just sort of a list of a number of books. There are many others, but those are some that I think if you're interested in doing some more reading in this particular area, then those are some examples of books that you might and authors and writers that you might consider. There's a plethora of information out there for you to take advantage of. So, and I would love it would be wonderful if some of you happen to read some of these books. Let me know your thoughts. And then if you want to do sort of a brief interview, 15, 20 minutes or a little bit longer, where you share your insights from the book, then let's get together. We'll set it up. We'll work through sort of how we're going to navigate through a discussion where I kind of interview you about the book, and then we'll include it in one of our sessions in the future. And it would be a way of taking the time that you've spent and reading the book and sharing your learnings with other people, and so that we all benefit. And so it wouldn't have to be for the whole hour. It could be 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long it takes to address the book and provide an overview of some of the best learnings that you obtain from the book and share them with others. So let me know if you're interested in doing something like that. if you have a good book that you've read, and we can take a look at that. Okay. All right. Questions, comments on any of that? Anybody? Lots of good stuff out there. Lots of good books. Let me see. That's 5. That's 10. 15. There's 19 books right there that we looked at. Questions? Have any of you read some of these already? Any of those interest you?
Yeah. Hey, Steve, while you're talking, I just ordered one of them on Audible. It's the well, I forgot the name of it already.
Is it
Oh,
on
New
this
Babylon.
slide? Oh, no.
New
Uh-huh.
Babylon Rising.
This one. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let me know what you think after you read that one, Caleb. That'd be fascinating. Or after you listen to it, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else read any of these other books?
Hey, Steve, I thought, I see the 2019 on the
Hmm.
third jihad, but I thought that I'd read that earlier. Maybe it was a different name for that book, but I thought it was the third jihad, but maybe it's a different one out of from Michael Yusuf.
Oh, you mean you thought you read this and thought it was dated a little bit earlier?
Yeah, I thought a few years ago I read something very similar to that.
Hmm. I'm pretty sure I could have made a mistake, but I think that no, I think that's right because that's a relatively new book. It's a relatively new one. Now, he's got other books out, so it could have been a different book. Um, and like this End Times and The Secret of the Mahdi, that's 2016. It wouldn't be that one, would it, that you're thinking about?
I think maybe it was Middle East Beast or
Oh, yeah, that's
something
Joel
else.
Richardson. Yeah, Joel Richardson's Mideast Beast, 2012.
Oh, and the
Yeah.
yeah, we read the Hillary was kind of pointing at him as we go here. I think we read the Islamic Antichrist too.
And the Mideast Beast.
Uh, uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, those are now getting a little bit dated, but there's still good information in there, really good stuff. Again, when you read when you read any of this stuff, you have to do it with a filter. And that's what I've tried to help with a little bit, but there's just so much. There's so much information. It's kind of like information overload.
Well, I mean, the problem is that things are changing so rapidly right now that anything more than like a year or two old is, it's tough to think, okay, well, am I getting the latest perspective, based
Hmm.
on real world events for what's going on?
Hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Exactly. Yeah. The landscape does change quickly, doesn't it? Um, yeah, it sure does. And that's why, like, even now, I mean, as good as these two books, like Joel Richardson's two books, The Islamic Antichrist and Mideast Beast, even as good as the information is in those, gosh, it's even getting dated now as fast as things are changing. So, yeah, exactly. Um, anybody else? Anybody else familiar with any of these writers? I found Lutzer, like in the Cross and in the Shadow of the Crescent. I found this book to be really helpful. Um, he writes in a style that's just easy to read. It's not difficult to read at all. Um, but it's loaded with really good information and good insight. So I really like his writing style. Not to diminish that of any other that's on these two slides, but I just found his to be really really helpful. Okay. Well, if anybody doesn't have any questions or comments, or if you haven't read any of these, what I should have done also is giving you a list of all the different podcasts that are helpful that I've found. I think I mentioned Janet Mefford, really helpful. Janet Mefford, Jan Markell, of course, with Olive Tree Ministries. There's what? Who else? Oh, Janet Parshall. Those are great. And then there's a number of others that I've got. I've got more podcasts in my iPhone than I can possibly listen to in a day. I could literally sit here and listen probably all day long, all day long, 8 hours a day and listen to podcasts. There's that many. So I don't do that. I try to be pretty selective in what I listen to because there's only so many that I can listen to. But those three are really good. They're all women, but they're fantastic in what they do. And but there's others, there's others that are not necessarily of a Christian. They're not approaching it necessarily as a Christian, but they're really informative. Dan Bongino's one that's, he's really a good, more of a political commentator that gives you some good insights. There's others. There's The Federalist has a good podcast out. I listen to occasionally. Pretty objective. They try to be pretty objective about what's going on in our, especially in domestic politics. But if you listen to some of these other Christian podcasters, and I've got some others I can't think of right now, but if you listen to some of these Christian podcasters, you kind of get a Christian, biblical worldview slant on what's happening. So that's always helpful. And they'll bring in other Christian speakers to interview. So that's really, really helpful. Okay, well, there's lots of information out there, as you can see. Let me know if you look at any of this and you benefit from it. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So just let me know. And so let me close out in prayer, and I'll hopefully see you Sunday. Heavenly Father, thank you for the plethora of information that's available to us today and that we can take advantage of it. Thank you for the times in which we live. We're living in increasingly evil times. We see the evil all around us. We see the evil up on the national platform and up on the national stage playing out. And we see the forces of evil doing battle with and even completely reversing the truth. Just like the prophets of old said, the truth is exchanged for a lie and the lie is exchanged for a truth. And that's happening every time we turn the corner and listen to the news. So give us discerning ears, discerning minds, to properly filter all that we're being deluged with in the way of information. But at the same time, Heavenly Father, don't let in us, don't let us, I should say, become so overwhelmed with all of the information that we're being exposed to that we lose track of the need to spend time just meditating in you and just cut off the phone, move ourselves away from social media and focus on you. We all need that, and we need that desperately, quite frankly, to maintain our sanity and to maintain our orientation to you and to truth. So I pray that this series has been encouraging to everyone, and thank you for it, and thank you for the time to have done it. And we look forward to whatever we're going to cover next, and I just pray for your guidance in that regard. And we pray all of this in the name of our wonderful Lord and Savior. Amen. All right. Thanks, guys, and I hope to see you Sunday, okay? Have a great evening and great day for those in the Philippines, Nestor and Denai, and whoever else may have joined. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.